The fifth season of Major takes a detour from the main plot to focus on the World Baseball Cup, the show's interpretation of the World Baseball Classic. For those of you who don't know, the World Baseball Classic is the premier international baseball tournament, which started in 2006 and continued in 2009 and every 4 years thereafter. Major had an exciting opportunity to broadcast its fifth season in conjunction with the 2009 World Baseball Classic, as Japan completed its second straight title. Because of its timely airing, I'm sure this season felt like Major's most essential, and considering it has the best MAL score of any of the seasons, it seems like the world agrees. And more than reflect real-world occurrences, Major's fifth season reveals fascinating perspectives on international competition, global rivalries, and Japan's place in the baseball world. Season 5 is filled with exciting baseball, heartwarming tales of cooperation, and our favorite characters playing on the biggest stage. But the thing that stands out the most about this season to me is this show's absolute disdain for the Korean national team. This, unfortunately, is based in reality. Without getting into the sad and complicated history between Korea and Japan, I'll just say that these two sides rarely say nice things about each other. Even Ichiro, the most famous Japanese player of all time, who has never said a bad thing in his life to the American media, once said in 1997 that Korea, quote, smells like garlic. And this was on a goodwill tour. But in 2006, with a chance to atone for his remarks, he humbled himself in front of the press, and nope, just kidding, he promised that Korea wouldn't beat Japan for the next 30 years.
Well then.
As it turns out, Korea actually beat Japan twice in the 2006 Classic. Korea actually made it all the way to the semifinals, where a quirk in the rules had Japan advancing despite posting a 1-2 record against their biggest rivals. But is any of this reflected in Major? Not at all. The Korean team gets a passing mention, mostly about how easy it will be for the Dominican and Venezuelan teams to beat them. And when they play Japan, they don't even get a speaking character or more than a few seconds on screen. Heck, even the Cuban team gets a backstory in a full episode, but the third biggest baseballing nation in the world gets basically zero representation. Korea may get the cold shoulder in this show, but other countries also get some notably poor treatment. The Venezuelan and Dominican teams in particular demonstrate some problematic details. For one, they're both represented with entirely black rosters, when in reality the 2006 and 2009 Dominican teams were heavily mixed while the Venezuelan teams were pretty white. For another, the show expresses harmful stereotypes, like the Latino ball players foregoing finesse and strategy and relying on their overwhelmingly superior athleticism to win ball games. There's a lot of stereotyping in here to pull apart, so I'll oversimplify it by saying it's a common attitude that Latino ball players aren't as smart as their white American and Japanese counterparts. And anyone who watched Yadier Molina and the Puerto Rican team play in 2017 knows that this is absolute horse shit. Another small detail that upsets me is the jersey color the show decided the Venezuelan team would wear. In real life, the Venezuelan team wears blue, red, and yellow, mirroring the colors of their flag, but in this show, they wear green and white. For no particular reason either, since every other country wears jerseys that have either similar colors to what they wore in real life or colors that reflect their flags. But not Venezuela, for some reason. I don't really understand why the Venezuelan team gets such poor representation in this show, but if you're going to give the show credit about one thing, it's predicting how well they would play. If this season was supposed to be a prediction about how the 2009 Classic would go, then kudos to the producers for correctly predicting that Venezuela would make a surprise run to the semifinals. This show accurately predicted 3 out of the 4 semifinal contestants, with Japan and the United States also making it to the knockout round, while their final prediction of Cuba wasn't necessarily a bad choice considering their silver medal in the first edition. But Cuba was unable to repeat their success in 2009, losing in the second round and placing 6th overall. Now, you may be wondering, who made it to the semifinal in 2009 instead of Cuba? Oh, right. Korea didn't just beat Japan twice, again, on their way to their second consecutive semifinal appearance. They beat Venezuela in the knockout round and faced off against Japan in the finals. And let me tell you, it was one of the greatest games ever played. I know because I was there, and Dodger Stadium was electric. The sold-out game was split about 80% with local Korean fans and 20% Japanese fans, and everyone made it known that they were there. The Japanese fans brought trumpets, the Korean fans brought drums. Empty hands were filled with thundersticks, and there was not a single quiet moment throughout the game. Japan took an early lead and held it all game, until Korea tied the game with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th. In the top of the 10th, Japan got 2 runners in scoring position, and who had the game-winning hit? None other than Ichiro, of course, who couldn't fulfill his promise earlier in the tournament but made sure that Korea wouldn't win on that day. But none of this happens in the show, not because we can't expect the producers to predict the future, but because it's pretty apparent that Major cares as much about the Korean team as Ichiro does. In reality though, they should care a lot more. In their 4 World Baseball Classic appearances, Korea actually has a winning record against Japan, losing out in both the 2006 and 2009 knockout stages despite having played better against the eventual champions. But arguments aside, what speaks loudest is trophies, and on that shelf, it's Japan 2, Korea nothing. It's pretty telling how poorly this show thinks of its Korean characters, but it's even more enlightening how little this show thinks of its own team. Throughout the season, the Japanese team is on a mission not only to win the cup, but to prove to the rest of the world that Japanese baseball is the most effective style of play. I don't know for sure whether this reflects reality. Japanese baseball is very much its own style, copied across Asia for its effectiveness and accessibility to less athletic players, and because of colonialism. But the truth is, most Western fans don't see the Japanese style as inferior, but different. Whatever inferiority complex this show feels about its team seems self-imposed. Maybe the Japanese team really set out to vindicate its own style as worthy in real life, and there's nothing wrong with that. What I find weird is how the show wears its inferiority complex, repeatedly telling us how much more talented the American and Latin teams are to the Japanese team. But doesn't it remember how Japan won it all in 2006? It couldn't predict that Japan would win again in 2009? Major's 5th season dabbles in racist stereotypes, but arguably the most harmful ones it produces are ironically to the Japanese team. It reinforces the idea that Japanese players are less athletic than Western ones, which is ludicrous considering that right now the most talented ball player in the world happens to be Japanese. It also reinforces the idea that small ball is seen as small potatoes, which was disproved twice when Japan won the first 2 world titles. Japanese players are really good at baseball. I just wish this show would acknowledge that. Personally, I also think Major's 5th season is its best, not because of the tournament arc or the patriotic chest thumping, but because it's a season-long side quest from the mostly bad main story. But even while distracting us away from a melodramatic and one-dimensional storyline, Major can't help but revert to basic understandings of non-Japanese baseball cultures. Just because this is a kid's show doesn't mean it has to present a fundamentally simplistic worldview. If you only had to watch one of Major's 6 seasons, I recommend you make it this one. It works well as a standalone season apart from being the most beloved arc of the series as well. But in the end, it's still Major, colorful, childish, and superficial Major.